Hello and welcome back to Vox Terra. Today, NOAA and how they've recently changed what normal climate means. Now this should be screaming headline news as it shows the Earth is getting warmer. And it should have been screaming headline news 30 years ago how the Earth has been heating. But it has been largely due to the power and the influence of the petrochemical fossil fuel industries. So I'm going to start today with an article from the Union of Concerned Scientists, an excellent site if you have not checked them out. No NOAA data shows just how abnormal our climate has become, by Kristy Dahl, published on senior climate scientist, May 7th, 2021. NOAA, and this is not what she sounds like, NOAA's new 30-year climate normals clearly show how normal ain't what it used to be. That's from the Union of Concerned Scientists. And she juxtaposes it in the way I would with another report from the International Energy Agency. The world is returning to pre-pandemic emission levels. Demand for fossil fuels is set to grow significantly in 2021, underpinning a rise in emissions of almost 5%. And now I'm going to quote her again because normally the Union of Concerned Scientists over my lifetime never really spoke in dramatic terms, but things are getting so out of hand now they are. She says, we should be pushing back against what's normal to give our kids some semblance of a recognizable climate future. So back to this NOAA report, as she explains, the way it works is every 10 years, NOAA produces a set of what are called climate normals. Now these climate normals are based on the conditions of the past 30 years. And as I said, they're edging upward in heat. So as she points out, until earlier this month, the 30-year averages spanned 1981 to 2010. Basically the climate the millennials grew up with. But the new 30-year averages are from 1991 through 2020. Basically the climate the Gen Zs have been coming up with. Now, notice we hear millennials, Gen Zs, and often the media talks about baby boomers, but as an aside, what about us Gen Xers? So citing from that Union of Concerned Scientists, the new average temperatures show that much of the country is now significantly more than a full degree Fahrenheit hotter than it was during the 20th century norms. But it's not just the temperature that's up. Also, we're seeing increases in precipitation east of the Rockies and decreases in precipitation west of the Rockies. That's now also a new normal. More precipitation in the east, less precipitation in the west. Now there's a CBS News article I want to share with you that really breaks it down excellently by region and also points out the fact of something I've said on my show, that global temperatures overall have increased roughly 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's right at the NASA website by the way, since the outset of the Industrial Revolution, or the real big era of burning fossil fuels. So from CBS News, NOAA's new normal climate report is anything but normal by Jeff Berardelli. May 6, 2021. In fact, 9 out of the 10 of the most hottest years of record have occurred in the last 10 years. And as an interesting aside, I've seen that attributed to the boom in fracking within the US and elsewhere. So keep that in mind when people are trying to sell natural gas as a clean, green alternative. So like I said, and as this CBS article points out, the regional temperatures are different. For example, some parts of the country have increased in temperature by 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Western and northeastern states are warming the fastest. The southeast is warming less fast. A warming climate intensifies the water cycle of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. So the dry climate gets drier, and the wet climate gets wetter. And I pointed that out. Remember, these hotter air masses, they really hold on to that moisture. They don't want to give it up, and when they do, it pours. Or they're just pulling it all out of the soil for a prolonged period of time. So back to CBS, in the west, the terrain is generally dry. So what happens with that dry terrain, more of this excess heat that's being generated now goes directly into heating the air, rather than evaporating the moisture. Whereas in the southeast, or places that are getting wetter, more of that heat goes in towards evaporating that new excess of water. Now what's happening in the west is you're getting what's called a feedback loop of dryness. Right? That dryness that heat is pulling out moisture from the soil. So in the West, the terrain is generally dry. Much of the excess heat from climate change goes directly into warming the air temperatures, not evaporating moisture. As precipitation becomes less consistent in the Southwest, the ground becomes drier. With less moisture on the ground, air temperatures increase even more, drying out the ground even more. So now the atmosphere gets even hotter. And with that, all that moisture gone in the West, what happens is there's less moisture in the soil now and in the plant life to evaporate and create regional cloud formation. So they're getting less rain, and this cycle intensifies. The lack of soil moisture means less rain falls locally. Drought begets drought. Whereas in the Southeast, the opposite is true. The moisture-laden climate, much of the heat is used to evaporate water, rather than directly heating the air, which explains the slower rate of warming. The warmer Gulf of Mexico allows more moisture to be evaporated and transported northward, falling as rain and snow. Also, a warmer U.S. means that more of the rain on the ground is re-evaporated, enhancing precipitation even more. A positive water feedback loop. More rain begets more rain. But if you think that means more drinking water, au contraire. As I showed you in an earlier video titled More Floods, Less Water, meaning less drinking water, an EPA report about Tennessee in particular showed that while Tennessee is getting heavier rainfall, again because of those hotter air masses, it's getting heavier rainfalls. More of that rain is coming in these really heavy downpours, causing flooding. But then what happens is it's short term. The hotter conditions pull more of the moisture out of the soil, so the streams aren't getting quite recharged and refreshed like they used to, nor is the groundwater. So yes, you've got more rain pouring down into heavy floods, but you can still wind up with less drinking water. So interestingly, while much of the U.S. and the planet has been getting hotter, one slight spot where it's slightly cooled a little over the past 10 years was in the northern plain states. And the reason they're thinking there, which corresponds a lot to what I've been thinking, is that part of it could be due to the jet stream getting thrown off by the fact the Arctic is heated up roughly 3 times faster than the rest of the planet. Remember that Arctic heat, because the Arctic's heated up so much more than the rest of the planet, the difference between the Arctic cold and the tropics is less. So that makes the jet stream weaker, so that Arctic air kind of slumps further south than it used to. That's one explanation. Another really interesting one they were saying is that due to changing crop patterns, apparently there's been more transpiration, I believe it's called, from the plants, which also has a regional cooling effect. So understanding the interplay of plant life and climate is pretty important to understanding how we could possibly stave off some of these worst effects. Now, the CBS article also goes on to point out that even a slight degree hotter in overall average temperatures leads to a lot more heat waves. It also leads to a lot more disasters. Like, again, it supercharges these hurricanes and the floods and the dry spells and thus the wildfires, etc. And they back that up with a study from NOAA showing the number of disasters each year in the U.S. that cause greater than $1 billion in damage has more than quadrupled since the 1980s. As a scientist, Ed Hawkins pointed out in his tweet, cited in that CBS News article, what was unusually warm in the 1950s is now normal. What was extremely warm in the 1950s is now just unusual. What was impossibly warm in the 1950s is now possible. So that gets us to what I'm concerned about with this changing the term of normal, right? Now, maybe you've grown up and you've noticed a lot of these changes and you've been disturbed as I've been by the dismissiveness about them in the local news media and people around you. So you've had an unusually hot day in the middle of winter, and maybe the response from local meteorologists is, oh, wow, this is fun, and how cheerful. And maybe other people are like, well, I can go jogging in shorts and t-shirt in the middle of winter. Well, awesome. Well, it's not awesome, because it leads to these other extreme events. But another issue, though, is by changing what's normal, now the local meteorologists will say, well, it's just a normal hot day like always. And it isn't, or it wasn't. Let me quote from you from Michael Mann, a premier climate scientist and activist. Adjusting normal every 10 years perverts the meaning of normal. and normalizes away climate change. So that Union of Concerned Scientists article I started with, liken this to the frog in the boiling pot of water. You're just gradually raising things and you're not really noticing what's going on. That's the danger of using the word normal. And as she started off with saying, normal got us into this mess, that's my words there, normal got us into this mess, she calls for changes to our lifestyle to avert the worst of climate catastrophe. And that's really all the environmental movement has wanted for decades over my lifetime, is just less consumption, less burning of fossil fuels, less disposable products. And let's make that our political priority. Support my channel, help get the word out by giving it a like, a thumbs up, and commenting, subscribing, clicking that notification bell, and support these environmental organizations that I like to cite from, like the Union of Concerned Scientists. And until next time, peace be with you.